Good evening. In a world grappling with endless wars, the muddy trenches of Ukraine, the shattered cities of the Middle East, a voice of reason has emerged from an unexpected quarter. Air Chief Marshal A.P. Singh, speaking on the lessons of Operation Sindoor, has offered a powerful reminder to global leaders. His message wasn't about the thunder of jets or the might of missiles. It was about something far more potent: strategic clarity and the wisdom of knowing when to stop. Diplomats and military strategists worldwide are taking note not just because of the source, but because of the stark relevance of his words to the conflicts bleeding our world dry today. The world, it seems, is desperate for a different way to think about war. The Air Chief Marshal's remarks have cut through the noise of jingoistic rhetoric that often accompanies military discussions. He spoke not of infinite victory or unconditional surrender, but of defined, achievable objectives. This is a language that seems to have been forgotten in the corridors of power in many world capitals. In an era where wars are live-streamed and public opinion is shaped by viral social media clips, the temptation for leaders is to project strength through prolonged aggression. Marshal Singh's analysis of Operation Sindoor challenges this very notion. He argues that true strength lies not in the capacity to wage endless war, but in the discipline to achieve a specific goal and then decisively step back from the brink, paving the way for diplomats to secure the peace. So, what is the blueprint for a successful military operation? According to the lessons drawn from Operation Sindoor, it begins long before the first shot is fired. It starts with the painstaking work of defining clear, tangible, and achievable objectives. Is the goal to reclaim a captured post? Is it to neutralize a specific terrorist threat? Is it to enforce a no-fly zone over a limited area? The success of Operation Sindoor was predicated on this very clarity. The political leadership and military commanders agreed on a precise, limited goal and did not waver from it. This principle stands in stark contrast to how many modern conflicts are initiated. Often, wars are launched with grand, ill-defined ambitions that belong in political speeches, not military orders. The danger of such ambiguity is that it creates a recipe for perpetual conflict. If the goal is something as nebulous as winning the peace or changing a regime's ideology, when do you know you have succeeded? Lack of a clear finish line turns short interventions into decade-long occupations. Operation Sindoor teaches that the mission's scope must be ruthlessly constrained to what is necessary and achievable. Setting limited goals ensures military force remains a tool of policy, not the policy itself. It forces leaders to think about the day after. What happens once the military objective is met? Diplomacy must be ready to take over. Operation Sindoor succeeded not just because the military was swift, but because a pre-planned diplomatic strategy was ready the moment fighting stopped. This seamless transition from military action to diplomatic negotiation prevents a power vacuum and the cycle of renewed violence after a ceasefire. Now, let's contrast the clarity of Operation Sindoor with the grim reality of today's protracted conflicts. Take a moment to consider the Russia-Ukraine war. What started, at least on the surface, with stated goals like demilitarization, denazification, has turned into a brutal, grinding war of attrition. The objectives have become fluid and expansive. For Russia, goals shifted. Quick regime change, securing a land bridge to Crimea, annexing eastern territories. For Ukraine and its Western allies, defending sovereignty, inflict a decisive strategic defeat on Russia. With no clear, mutually acceptable endpoint, the conflict has no off-ramp. Similarly, think about Israel's recurring conflicts, especially in Gaza. These operations often begin with stopping rocket fire, dismantling terrorist infrastructure, quickly expand into broader goals, destroying Hamas, restoring deterrence. These are not easily measurable military objectives. How do you know when an ideology is destroyed? The result? Cycles of intense violence ending in uneasy ceasefires, not lasting peace. Lack of a political endgame or day-after plan for governance and reconstruction means root causes remain, making future eruptions likely. These long wars show the danger of victory disease, the belief military force can solve political problems. Military action untethered from political strategy in Ukraine and the Middle East. The fighting continues because leaders are trapped by their rhetoric, unable to declare limited victories. They become prisoners of the conflict, pouring resources, pouring human lives into a strategic black hole with diminishing returns and no clear path to stable peace. The consequences of ignoring the lessons of Operation Sindoor are not just strategic. They are, frankly, devastatingly human and economic. Prolonged wars exact a terrible toll on a nation's economy. Resources that could be spent on healthcare, education, infrastructure are instead diverted to the war machine. In Russia's case, international sanctions have crippled key sectors of its economy, while the immense cost of sustaining its military operation puts a huge strain on the national budget. For Ukraine, the physical destruction of its industrial base, infrastructure, and cities represents a setback that will honestly take generations to overcome, creating a long-term dependency on international aid. But beyond the balance sheets, the societal costs are immeasurable. Long wars fracture societies. An entire generation of young men and women is lost to the battlefield or forced into exile. In Ukraine, millions have been displaced, creating a refugee crisis that reverberates across Europe. The psychological trauma of living under constant threat of bombardment scars the collective psyche of a nation for decades. Social trust erodes, political polarization deepens, and the fabric of normal life is just torn apart. The longer a war drags on, the harder it is to heal these wounds and rebuild a cohesive, functioning society once the fighting finally stops. A nation's security is, paradoxically, weakened by endless war. While the initial goal might be to enhance security, a protracted conflict often achieves the opposite. It depletes a country's military arsenal, exhausts its troops, and makes it vulnerable on other fronts. The focus on a single, all-consuming conflict can lead to strategic neglect of other rising threats. Long wars often destabilize entire regions, creating power vacuums that are filled by extremist groups and non-state actors. The very instability the war was meant to quell ends up spreading, creating new and more complex security challenges for the future. Finally, a nation standing in the world is, honestly, profoundly affected. A country seen as being bogged down in an unwinnable war loses credibility and influence. Its diplomatic capital is squandered as it is forced to constantly defend its actions on the international stage. Alliances can become strained as partners grow weary of the conflict's economic and political costs. In contrast, a nation that demonstrates the discipline and wisdom to achieve its objectives quickly and then pivot to diplomacy, as exemplified by the Operation Sindoor model, projects an image of strength, reliability, and strategic maturity. It becomes, a credible actor for peace, not a source of perpetual instability. So, what are the practical steps that leaders and diplomats can take to apply the lessons of Operation Sindoor? First, and most fundamentally, is to institutionalize strategic clarity. Before any military authorization, governments must be required to produce a formal document outlining specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound objectives. This document should also include a pre-approved exit strategy and a diplomatic engagement plan. Second, leaders must bridge the civil-military divide. There needs to be constant, honest dialogue between political leaders, military commanders, diplomatic officials from the planning stage all the way through to execution and conclusion. Third, governments need to master strategic communications. In the 21st century, the information domain is a critical battlefield. Leaders must proactively shape the narrative, both at home and abroad. They need to clearly and repeatedly communicate the limited nature of their objectives, the justification for their actions, and their desire for a swift return to peace. This builds international support, manages domestic expectations, and puts pressure on the adversary to negotiate. It also serves as a public commitment that makes it harder for leaders themselves to fall into the trap of mission creep. It's really about using transparency as a strategic tool. In conclusion, Air Chief Marshal Singh's reflections on Operation Sindoor are more than just a military analysis. They are a profound lesson in statecraft. The operation stands as a powerful symbol of an alternative to the endless wars that define our era. It champions a philosophy where strength is measured not by the capacity to inflict endless destruction, but by the wisdom to use force with precision, restraint, and a clear purpose. It reminds us that the ultimate goal of war is not victory, but a better peace. By embracing clear goals, planning for the end from the beginning, and prioritizing diplomatic resolution, the world can learn to step back from the abyss and build a more stable and secure future for everyone. That is the enduring legacy of Operation Sindoor.